But I appreciated Ingrid's thoughts this morning because it reminded me of a conversation I had just a few weeks ago at Intuit's headquarters in San Francisco area. Intuit, they created Quicken, QuickBooks financial software for small businesses and personal financial software. We interviewed Scott Cook a number of years ago as part of this project on innovation, the founder of Intuit. And does anybody know Scott Cook or has met Scott Cook before? I've bumped into people all over the world who know Scott, and without exception, they have nothing but exceptional things to say about him. And it's a way of leading that invites his people into an innovative space without threatening them, but it just brings them in, it draws them in. When I was there at Intuit, one of their initial success factors in terms of personal financial software was ease of use. In fact, that's the whole point of how the business came about. Scott Cook's wife was deeply frustrated at home, trying to do their financial books and trying to plan for retirement and make all that stuff work. With pen and pencils and with papers and with computers, none of it was working. And he was watching this happen and had some experiences that led him to build this incredible software company. Well, ease of use was their competitive edge for over more than a decade. But there came a point at which, and you're well aware, that ease of use no longer in that world is a competitive edge. And for a number of years, they rested on their laurels and really weren't going anywhere. And so what they've done in the last few years is actually tried to re-engage in a deeper way their people in getting outside of Intuit and into the consumer's world who's using their product and service to be able to figure out what's next. What could we be doing better? How could we approach that? If you or I were going to have our picture taken in 1886, we would not have taken it ourselves. It would have been done by a professional photographer. Now, often, if they weren't in a building, they actually carried these big tents around with the large cameras, with a big black cape over it. They had a glass plate that the image would be imaged on, and then you have to develop it and give you a picture back. Only professionals did the work then. There was a man named George Eastman, and now you know where I'm probably going, who at that point was sort of in the photography industry, but not fully. And he happened to buy a tent, a camera, plates, developing equipment to take with him on a vacation. He was going to try it out. Well, for a variety of reasons, he actually never went on vacation. But as he was sitting there looking at that big stack of material that he would have taken to take pictures, he realized this is not very useful for people like me trying to do the job of taking a photo. And so that's when he did some technical work, he thought carefully, and he was the inventor of camera on a roll. And then 14 years later, this is what completely disrupted the photography industry. You put that roll of film inside of what they call the Brownie camera. You sold it for the equivalent of US $1. People, anybody, all of us in this room could buy the camera, take a picture, and we could get it back in a few weeks. It was an incredible disruption. I'm going to go forward now from that 1900 point. They were the disruptor. About 47 years, 48, 49 years, my mother was in Paris. And she happens to be the third person from the right up there. From your left, excuse me. That picture could not have been taken without Eastman's invention that disrupted the photography industry. Now, fast forward another about 35 years, and you get this picture of the inventor of the electronic camera, mid-1970s, an employee engineer working for Kodak. They couldn't go with that disruptive invention because it would disrupt their own income stream, because they were a monopoly, basically making a lot of money off of film. They set the invention aside. Fast forward another 35 or so years, 2011, last year. My daughter was working in Paris. This is my daughter on the left, standing in the same spot her grandmother was almost 65 years earlier. What kind of camera was that picture taken with? A mobile phone. The disruptor becomes disrupted, and you know the bankruptcy story. It's a story that happens to companies. It's a story that happens to parts of companies. It's a story that happens to teams. It's a story that happens even, whoa, to individuals. Trust me, that was not planned. But it was perfect. There we go. You know, it really is, you know, the Lion King notion, given the Disney and Walt Disney sort of thing about dreaming the impossible, the cycle of life works for individuals, teams, units, organizations, and for that matter, countries. We have a new idea, a vision, something new we discover, and we're going to take it off. And it's a life cycle, it's a curve, it's an S-curve, whatever you want to call it. But once we have something new, maybe it's a new way of delivering retail, maybe it's a new way of managing our people. Whatever the newness is, because it's new, we by definition don't know how to do it. If my wife asked me how to do a waltz dance, it's new to me because I don't know how to dance. And even if I catch the vision and try to do it, I've got to develop the capability. And that's the issue in that second stage of, you mentioned trust, Ingrid. This is the place where people pay attention to whether or not leaders really care about their new idea. We've discovered something new. Next stage is, do you care enough to develop my capability to do it? And if you do, if you put the energy into building my capability, I trust you. And then, if that's in place, we get to that top part of the curve, which is the delivery space. That's where, when you hold me accountable, it's just fine. Because you've helped me be capable to be accountable. And that's the cycle. Think about it. It works for us individually. It works for teams. The same logic applies to organizations. Now, here's the challenge and the disruptive challenge for any of us. At what point are we on that decline in the curve? At what point is my job going to be history? At what point does my team not have a future? At what point does my unit in the business have to be doing something fundamentally different? You know, those are the questions as leaders we need to be asking. Leaders are different than managers, in my point as well. Leaders do this stuff. They discover new direction, they develop capability, they deliver results. Management, it's really interesting. I bet you've seen this because I've seen it all over the world. And excuse me for what might seem like a vulgar example. You know those toilet seat covers that we put on the seats in airplanes? And sometimes in other sort of restrooms around the world. Have you ever noticed that little line on the cardboard that the cover is? About 5 times out of 10, there's a thing underneath that toilet seat that says, "Brought to you by management." Look! Pay attention next time. Brought to you by, that's what management is. We're not about that today, we're about leading, and this is the cycle we're leading on. Okay, here we go. Now, either we get disrupted, in other words, we're not paying attention to where we are on that curve and are we building our people, or we are the disruptors. And what I'd like to talk with us about today is the disruptors. Clayton Christensen, author of The Innovator's Dilemma, he understands disruptive companies. Companies like Kodak in 1900 that come in and fundamentally change an industry. He'd researched it for years. He had a best-selling sort of book on it, The Innovator's Dilemma. And about 10 years ago, I was talking with Clay, and I said, "Clay, you know a disruptive business when you see it. You can explain it far better and more articulately than I can. But Clay, here's the question. How did those individuals actually get the ideas to build those sorts of businesses? How did they get them? What were they doing? What was the story?" And Clay is about 4 inches taller than I am, and I've always got to look up to him. And Clay sort of scratched his head, and he said, "Hal, I'm not sure. I don't know how they got the ideas, but I know what a great idea that disrupts looks like." So that was the launching point. We were trying to figure out how did they get those ideas. So you go to some companies like Skype. that completely disrupted the telecom industry. I live in France. There's a company there called Free that's now in the midst of fundamentally disrupting French telecom with the Skype kind of logic. You look at Amazon and its complete disruption of the entire book industry. How did those people, how did Jeff Bezos at Amazon, how did Nicholas Zenstrom, founder of Skype, what were they doing when they got those ideas? That was the question we were trying to figure out. So we interviewed not only them, but about 100 other people like them around the world. And basically, we were asking them, tell us, Jeff Bezos at Amazon, how did you get the idea? What was going on? Who was there? What were you doing? And after you talk to 100 people, you start to discern patterns, things that people are doing similarly, even though they're in very different industries, airlines, PayPal, et cetera, et cetera. And those patterns, we basically realized if you get inside of those innovators' heads, they do think differently and they act differently. Both are really important. As leaders, they do both of those things. Now, that then led us to this book called The Innovator's DNA and these 5 skills of what these folks do. They think differently, they act differently. And I'm going to ask a question before we launch into those skills and how you and I might become better at innovation. And that is, if you think of the Steve Jobs of the world, the Jeff Bezos, the Nicholas Zenstroms, whoever it might be that you perceive as being a super innovator, were they born that way? In other words, is it nature? Is it genetic coding? Does it come with us when we come into this world? Or is it nurture? Can we develop capability in terms of innovation and creativity? Now, it's a trick question if I say, is it one or the other, right? Most of us in this room realize it's a bit of both. But the more important question is, which do I as a leader believe is more critical? Is nature more important than nurture? Is nurture more important than nature? I'm going to give you about 2 minutes maximum at your tables to come to a conclusion on that question. And I'm going to ask the tables, what's your choice, folks? Is it more nature or more nurture when it comes to innovation and creativity, skills, and abilities? Nature more or nurture more? On your mark, get set, go. 2 minutes, get a decision. One person from the table will represent your perspective. How many tables had nature trumps nurture? Nature is more important than nurture. Not a single table? How interesting. So everybody was more on the nurture is more important than nature. Am I right? Okay. Maybe that's why you had so much energy coming in here today. Because here's the issue. If by chance you were in that nature trumps nurture camp, here's the challenge. Ingrid perhaps is my boss. She comes to me and says, she asked me to jump off the edge and innovate. She says, innovate, Hal, and I want your team to innovate. So I've got a team of 7 or 8 people. And now if nature is more important than nurture, what's my leadership problem? Who's got it and who doesn't? You know? You're innovative, you're not. You're innovative, you're not. You're innovative, you're not. So you 4, you can help me with innovation. The rest of you, you can go to lunch because you're not going to be very helpful, right? We laugh about it, but there are managers, and perhaps there are still in this room, who fundamentally believe it's more nature than nurture. And if that's the case, man, it makes it difficult for me to work with you if that's how you look at me. Because then it's like you either have it or you don't. Now, let's look at the data. I didn't do these studies. There are 5 or 6 studies around the world. You get genetically identical twins at birth, who for all sorts of unfortunate reasons, they're separated. They grew up in different families from birth until they're adults. Then you go back when they're 18 to 25 years old and you give them creativity and innovation tests to see how creative and innovative are they. And what they've discovered in these 5 or 6 studies around the world, well-done research studies, is about 33%, 1/3 of our creativity is indeed nature. It is driven a bit by the genetic coding we got when we came out. And so does anybody in this room either have a child or know a child who can't keep their fingers out of things? They're always getting into stuff. You know those kinds of kids? If I could get into their heads and do some examination, I'd probably find more dopamine 4, a chemical in their head compared to another kid who doesn't quite explore as much. It's sort of that kind of an issue, but it's not dominant. So nature does matter. It does make a bit of a difference. Nurture's important. Now, here's the issue. When I go around the world, and you travel around the world as well, it doesn't matter whether it's South Africa or Southeast Asia. It doesn't matter. You look at 4-year-old kids. What do 4-year-old kids do? I hear a lot of things out there. Do they ask questions? How many? Lots of questions. They're constantly asking questions. They're exploring and they're experimenting with things. Do they talk to all kinds of people? Absolutely. Do they observe the world carefully? Real carefully? Can I say a quick story? We've got 7 kids. It's a merger and acquisition kind of situation where I had 3. I got acquired. I had 3, she had 4, so now we have 7, and we have 5 grandchildren, and they're young. One of our daughters had one of her nieces in the car with her, and this is just to illustrate how powerful kids watch. And so here's what's going on. They're driving down the road. This is a left side driver, not a right side driver, driving down the road. And the niece, the 4-year-old niece in the back, is playing with this doll and kind of rattling and shaking it and hitting it against the windows. It's driving my daughter crazy. And so she's trying to tell her, settle down, settle down. Granddaughter's name is Coco. Settle down, Coco, settle down. She wouldn't stop banging this doll around. So this is not a positive parenting practice I'm going to suggest here, okay? She reached back and she grabbed the doll from my granddaughter as she's driving. And then she held the doll in the other hand out the window. And she said to my granddaughter, "No more dolly, and let's go." And my granddaughter is like, "Whoa, where'd my doll go?" It's like, like in Top Gun when the jet fighter pilots are looking at the plane, it's like, "Where'd my doll go?" And she's like she's devastated. But she watched. 2 weeks later, same granddaughter Coco's on a boat with her aunt who threw the doll out the window. And the granddaughter's watching her aunt really carefully. And at one point, her aunt sat the mobile phone down and then wasn't paying attention. So Coco snuck over, grabbed the mobile phone, went to the edge of the boat, held it out over the edge, and waited until she had eye contact with her aunt. And then you know the rest of the story. No more mobile. True story. The point is, as 4-year-olds, we engaged in the behaviors that adult innovators engage to get great ideas. Observing, networking, experimenting, questioning, it's the stuff we all did. So here's the issue. How many of us were once 4 years old? Now, I don't have the luxury of going back in time and being able to take videos of any of us when we were 4, but I'd put good money on it that every one of us acted like 4-year-olds. But then we went into school systems that kill these skills, from elementary school through college to some degree. But we have to remember, we all have more creative capacity than we think. And so if I were to ask this group, how many of you would describe yourself as creative or innovative? Raise your hands. Now, if I were asking 4-year-olds that question, how many hands would go up? All of them. It's because they're doing things that make them creative and innovative. And so here's what my hope is, that for those who maybe didn't raise their hands, you might be a little more confident by the end of this morning that if I chose to act differently, I could be more creative and innovative because I once was. So that's the hope. Set that aside. Here we go. Now, it's not just those 100 disruptive innovators we looked at. It's 6,000 people who we did a survey, both 360-degree leadership effect sort of assessment, as well as self-assessment survey, around these innovation skills, these 5 skills of innovators. And what we discovered is you didn't have to be famous like a Steve Jobs to get famous results. In other words, if I act like they act and do what they do, I build new businesses, I get breakthrough process, I get new ideas for new service approaches and new products that actually create value. Not just cool new ideas, but ideas that were financially valuable. And so that's what the data told us. Anybody who does enough of what we're going to talk about can get new ideas that make a difference. So here's where innovators start. It may sound strange, but they start with a problem. How many of you have a problem today? How many of you have a problem that you don't have a solution to? Honestly. Could be professional, could be personal. Is there anybody in this room who doesn't have some problem right now that they don't have a solution to? So we're good, right? When innovators are in that innovation mode, they care enough about a problem that when they wake up in the morning, they're thinking about it. And when they're talking to somebody at lunch, they're thinking about it. Maybe not completely, but it's there, it's present. They're trying to figure out a solution. So the first step to getting a great new idea is identifying a problem that you care enough about that you're going to pay attention to the world and engage with the world. Step number 1. Now, that may seem totally simplistic, but think of your people who work with you. You got a team of 5 people? Do you know what each of their problems are that they care the most about today? That if you were to help them as a leader solve those problems, they'd be really, really happy? That's the issue. What's my problem? What's yours? And then part of my job is figuring out, is it important? Does it matter? And then the question becomes, does it really, really matter? Got that settled? Got a problem? Okay, here we go. Here's what we do to solve it. One option is think outside of the box. Sometimes it's harder than it seems, because we're stuck in the box of the world we live in. Now, what I'd like to do is take this frame of Steve Jobs thinking differently. How do these people really think? This is a cognitive skill, the thinking part before the behavioral, the acting part. The cognitive skill is they do think differently. Here's an example of what their heads look like in terms of how they get new ideas. It's an example of trying to get people to stop using the escalators and to use the stairs instead. They think differently to create a solution. Here's what they did, okay? I'm going to give you the short of it. See those stairs on the left? They literally painted them like piano keys. Can you imagine that in your mind's eye? Painted them like piano keys, black and white, and then people came to that staircase when it looked like a piano. When they stepped on the keys, what did they hear? Piano sounds. And so as they started walking up the stairs, they could play tunes, and you got dogs walking up the stairs and kids jumping up and down. And basically, by turning the staircase into a piano, they literally were able to get people to stop using the escalator. By connecting a piano to a staircase, it changed people's behavior. And the issue becomes, that's how they did it. That's how they get new ideas. We call this stuff going on in their heads. We call it lateral thinking, right brain thinking, creative thinking, associational thinking. We landed on the word associational thinking. They're associating things that you would not normally put together. Who would put a piano on a staircase to get people to walk up it? That's how their heads work. Einstein put it a little more complexly but profoundly. He basically said we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. Classic Einstein. Creative thought involves combinatorial play. It's fun. I'm trying to connect things in ways nobody ever did it before. So, here's an example. Go back to the year 2001. You've got a computer, you've got internet, and you've got MP3 music files. How do you associate or connect those together? What do you get? Something's before then, slightly before then, iTunes. Then you add on a mini hard drive, then you add on a combination lock, what do you get? Then you get the iPod. Now, why is the combination lock part of that associational thinking? Steve Jobs' mandate to his people was, we've got all these CDs, my entire music library, we're going to put them into a small mini hard drive. Here's the challenge, designer. How am I going to find my music easily when I've got all those songs in there? So the designer's sitting there trying to figure out a solution. He's got a problem he cares about. It really matters because Steve Jobs wants a solution. So he's thinking about it, thinking about it, thinking about it. He's playing and spinning the dial on a combination lock in his office. And those dials are spinning and they're making noises. He's spinning that dial. And all of a sudden, he makes the connection. If we spun a dial, people could easily find their music. Remember that clickety sound on the first iPods? That came from the clickety sound that he heard when he was spinning that combination lock. Sometimes it's as simple as an object playing with it, solving the problem, ended up creating a solution for the iPod. It can be that simple. So we're going to try it. We're going to get our brains into this associational thinking mode. Here's what we're going to do. We've got a brick. One brick. It's not that big. It's a regular sized brick, but it does look like that brick. How many different creative ways could you use that brick? You've got a table. You've got a set of people at your table. As a group at the table, one person write down the ideas. I'm going to give you 2 minutes maximum, and I want you to write down as many possible creative uses that you can imagine of that one single brick. On your mark, get set, go. Okay. Count up. How many different ideas do you have? Count them up. We're going to see who has the most. Count them up real quickly. I'm assuming many groups have more than 10, am I right? More than 15? More than 20? Whoa, more than 25? More than 30? Okay, 25, 26, 27. 27, 27? Do we have 28? Pretty darn good. So we have 2 ties at 27. Well done. Okay, here we go. What I want to get out of this is number one, when we're trying to get new ideas, quantity matters. If I'm trying to solve a problem, be it a technical problem, be it a business problem, be it a process problem, a service problem, getting more possible solutions will lead me to a better idea. Quantity matters. So 28 is better than 13 in general. Now, I'm going to ask your group one of you to stand up and really loudly read. Is this mic working up here? Why don't you come up and read your list? That way everybody can hear. Does that sound good? Thank you. Now, before you read, just hold tight there. Before you read, quantity matters, but it's not everything. And we're going to kind of listen carefully because category is also important. It's not just numbers of different things, but it's jumping different categories, different areas, different domains. Let's listen for categories. Please, go ahead.
Okay. First one is a weight, door stopper, a candlestick, a flower pot arrangement, a weapon, another form, a smash and grab weapon, a step, an egg holder, a nutcracker, for balding, a pet brick, a pipe holder, a pen holder, a desk end, a base for displacement, for pottery, a peanut cracker, an umbrella stand, an anchor, a home for insects, a jelly mold, a toy for exercising, for smashing objects, and for gardening.
For what?
You can use it within the garden
as
a base.
Thank you. Well done. Okay. So I heard at least a couple of categories. One was holder, right? As soon as you get a holder category, you can get 100 ideas really fast because you can put a lot of things in that brick, right? And the other category was cracker, cracking nuts, cracking this, breaking, smashing kind of category. Again, we can do a lot of different things once we grab that category. If we can discipline ourselves to not just get high quantity, but also to jump categories, we then increase the probability that we're actually going to get a novel idea that nobody else has thought of. Now, when we get that kind of new association, here's what's going on. Literally, with different brain studies now that they've done, the electrical impulses in our head, when we're getting a new idea, it's a lot of activity going on trying to figure out the solution. Just before the new connections are made, our brain literally goes silent for a moment. Literally. The electrical stuff just goes blank. And then a new connection happens like, a novel new idea, a new solution here. That's what's going on. So one of the questions becomes, as individuals or as teams, or for that matter as organizations, when do I find the time for that space to let this association stuff happen, brainstorming, putting new things together? Where do you get your new ideas? Where do you create that space for this stuff to happen? Some people get new ideas in a shower. Got any shower new ideas, people here? Other people get it when they're riding a bike or running, exercising. We got exercise sort of insight people here? How many? Others get it when they're driving. Anybody like to drive? I see hands going up there. Any other places? I know what you're thinking. We all know what you're thinking. And if it's any consolation, my father actually built a library in our bathroom. So anyway, there we go. But there are lots of different places. Diane Green, who founded a company called VMware, it's sort of software behind software systems all over the world. Basically, she knows when she needs to get a new idea to go sailing. She loves to sail. And when she's got to get a new idea, she goes on a single-person sailboat. Like, I'm just going to go out on the ocean, I'm going to sail and get a new idea. It's kind of how it happens. Mark Benioff, who founded Salesforce.com, the whole idea for Salesforce.com and beginning cloud computing for enterprise-level solutions, that came when he was out swimming with the dolphins in the Pacific Ocean. That's where that connection made. What if we sold enterprise-level software like Amazon sells books? That sort of association. So one of the questions to ask ourselves personally is, where is my space? Where do I get these kinds of new ideas? And if I don't have a good answer, I'm probably not getting them consistently. But if I can create a good answer, I probably can get it consistently. The second question becomes, where do I create the space for my team to do what we just did? To brainstorm a high quantity of ideas, to get some different category jumping going on, and hopefully get a novel new approach to whatever the problem is we're caring about. So remember that problem I said, anybody got a problem in here, personal and professional? Remember that problem you have in your head? This is what I'm talking about. Do we take the time to specifically set aside this kind of associational thinking space And if we don't, we're not going to get the answers as easily or as quickly, ourselves or our teams. So that's sort of step one in terms of how these folks think. And if we, a couple of examples and then some suggestions about how to do it even better. I was talking about this issue of associational thinking, I think it was in Cape Town last year. And Gavin Semenowitz came up to me, and he said, let me tell you about my associational thought. He had never seen himself as creative as an adult. Never, he said. I just didn't see myself that way. He ended up finally having a boss in his early 30s who actually asked him for an idea. And he was like, you're weird. You're asking me for ideas? I don't know how to do that. And his boss not only asked it and expected it and was authentic about it, but he actually helped Gavin learn how to get new ideas. It got to the point where Gavin was giving ideas and actually doing pretty well, and then he decided, maybe I could start a new business, my own. I'll go on entrepreneurial, start my own stuff. And he thought, what's the problem out there? Well, one of the problems he identified was when we're trying to get a new job, we look in the help wanted ads, online, whatever the mechanism to figure out where's a new job. Here's the problem. Most of us quit old jobs because we have a bad boss. It's usually a bad relationship with a boss in some form or another. So if I'm trying to get a new job, what am I looking for? A good boss. But finding a good boss when you don't work in the place and know the people is like trying to find a good medical doctor. You have no idea when you walk through that door if this doctor knows what she's talking about, right? And so Gavin was thinking about that problem, and he finally realized, what if? What if we linked somehow 360-degree leadership feedback on a boss to the ad advertising a position who's working for that boss? Wouldn't that be cool? Kind of an interesting association. Well, he built a company. Go online, getagreatboss.com. It's most successful here in South Africa, but basically, here's what you do. I'm putting a help wanted ad out. People are looking for it. Gavin links the ad to an assessment. I get a team of my people to evaluate my leadership. If the assessment is good from my perspective, I then make it public. If it's not good, I don't have to put it up online. So I have my choice. And that's the notion of getagreatboss.com. It's connecting the unconnected in a surprising way. It's a fun idea. So if we struggle with this, and many adults do find associational thinking exhausting. As strange as that may seem, most adults get tired when they do this stuff, when they think this associational way. And so we have to kind of practice and get better at it. Well, one way of practicing is forcing it. So a company that was trying to build a new appliance, they made microwaves, they made dishwashers. They forced it by thinking, what are some elements of each of these appliances that we could combine together in new ways and get a different sort of appliance? So, think of a microwave. What do we have in a microwave? Small microwave, cooks food, cooks things. You've got a dishwasher, larger, water, heating, cleaning. They're thinking of different applications and approaches. Well, one company landed on the size of a microwave, the functionality of a dishwasher. You have two people in a small apartment or flat. They have a dishwasher in a sink. You put that lid down. 20 minutes later, it's all done, ready to go. Another company solved it differently. It's a countertop dishwasher, size logic, functionality of a dishwasher. But that's the notion. Sometimes by forcing things, we can get surprising connections. A company called IDEO. Anybody heard of IDEO? Got a few. One of the leading design firms in the world. They do all kinds of incredible design work for different kinds of companies, including retail banking companies. They basically try to figure out better ways of creatively serving consumers. In their offices around the world, they have one person who's set aside, full-time job is to find interesting things to put in a box to help designers figure out new solutions. Remember that combination lock in solving the iPod access to my music problem? Without the combination lock, he may not have had the solution. So it's literally sometimes complicating our worlds with funny things. So it might be, I'm thinking of my problem. I picked up these binoculars, these old binoculars, at a market in Brussels one day. Kind of an interesting object. I might say to myself, what does a pair of binoculars have to do with my problem? It could be that simple. And if I think about it, not only myself, but with a group of 3 or 4 people, I might get a new angle on the problem. Now, another way of doing this that's really quite creative, it was started by actually John Hunt, who's the global creative director. He is here in Johannesburg. We're actually meeting with him tomorrow again. But basically, John Hunt and his team at TBWA, Global Advertising Agency, when they're trying to get a new creative campaign for a client, they literally drag in a box of hats and shirts from creative companies, Apple, Starbucks, etc. So it might be these sorts of companies, HERMES, Virgin. All of them are doing very creative things. People kind of understand that. And they ask them, given your problem, if you put on the hat or the shirt of that company, how would they look at the problem? What would their perspective on it be? What would their potential solution be if someone from Starbucks was answering this issue? You ever tried that before? We've got some problems. Could you put the problem list up, please? I think there's a problem list. Somewhere on somebody's computer, hiding back there, is a list of problems. Am I right? Basically, while they're getting that up, here's the context. So we're going to put up a list of problems that are your issues. There are things at Nedbank that we're trying to get solutions to. They're problems that people care about. Now, you may not personally deeply care about it, but somebody does in the company, and we're going to ask you to pick one of these problems to do some associational thinking like we just talked about. So you're going to have a list of a number of problems. Do not labor over which problem to solve, okay? We don't have time for that. Just as a table, quickly pick one of these problems. Quickly pick one of these problems. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is essentially put on the hat of, or several hats, of people from these different creative companies. So the problem might be, how do we make time for innovation? Number 14. Okay, given that problem, don't have time to innovate. How do we make more time for innovation? We're putting on the hat of Virgin. If I worked for Virgin, anywhere in the world, and I'm trying to solve this problem, how to make time, how might someone working at Virgin solve that problem or see the problem? And so what I'd like you to do is put on different hats and give it a try. Now, we've got, how many are at the tables? 2, 4, 6, 8? 8 is a lot of people, and it's easy to become disengaged. You know what I'm talking about? Don't. Give it your best. We're not going to go long here. We're going to go for about 5 to 7 minutes, and essentially we're going to try to sort of put on different hats, trying to solve one of these problems from their angle. Now, what we're going to do is give you a moment to pick a problem, and then we're going to put back on screen the different companies that are innovative that they could put the hats on. Is it clear what I'm asking you to do? Great, okay. As a table, pick a problem, and in about 60 seconds, we're going to drop that screen and go back to the innovative company screen. Did anybody in this room happen to see the problem from a different angle, or perhaps get a kernel or a piece of a new idea about solving one of those problems? Did anybody get that happening in the last 5 minutes? I've got one hand. Is that a yes? Is that a yes? Anybody else? I see some heads going, but hands not going up. Okay. Anything worth sharing with the rest of the group? Or is it still in too early stage? You want to come back up and share it? There we go. That's the best mic for everybody to hear. Why don't you share what the problem was and then the quick insight?
I think our team focused on innovation, and we had the Apple hat on, and we had mixed views within the team. I think within the team there was some good understanding in terms of time and space. But I think the big constraint is having the Nedbank hat on. I think that's a challenge.
So the big constraint was?
Having the Nedbank hat on, thinking like a Nedbanker, and not like Apple.
Being too stuck with the hat of Nedbank on. Okay, it's time for a wardrobe change then. Is that the... Sometimes when we take a different perspective, it's what gives us new ideas. And it's key to this. And the challenge is when we become managers, leaders, not managers, you know what I'm talking about. When we become in leadership roles, taking other person's perspectives by definition becomes more difficult. Some friends of mine, colleagues at Northwestern University, a guy named Adam Galinsky, did a really interesting research study on this. Here's the deal. You've got two groups of people. Imagine this room split in half, group of people here, group of people there. You come into the room. I first ask this group to write down for 2 minutes about an experience where someone else had control over you, okay? And this group in a different room, you come into the study, and I ask you to write about an experience where you had control over somebody else. Just 2 minutes, write down about that. Then, when you're done with that, I'm then going to give you a pen. So imagine that this is a magic marker, and I'm going to ask you to draw a capital E on your forehead. It's not permanent, you know. Can you imagine that? And so you've got either an E that looks like an E to you, I wish I could write it up, or you've got a backwards E on your head, right? It's either going to look like an E to you, or it's going to be a backwards E. See what I'm saying? Which group wrote the E that somebody out there could see? The people who wrote about the controlling experience? It's actually the opposite. So people who had just written about an experience in their life when they were being controlled, when somebody else had power over them, it takes extra effort to write an E on our forehead so somebody else can read it, versus when I'm in that control attitude of I'm in control, I'm less likely to think about what's your perspective on the letter on my forehead. Does that make sense? And so the fundamental challenge here is that part of being innovative is really being able to take perspective. It could be being able to take the perspective of an employee. How do they see things? The perspective of a customer coming into the bank. How do they see things? It could be a perspective from the IT world of how do internal clients see my world? It's that capacity to take perspective from somebody else's hat, a different wardrobe, that enables us to see our own situation with new eyes and with a new lens. So if it's difficult, my suggestion is practice it. And this is one of the beauties of these skills of innovators. This associational thinking that we just did, if it's not easy to do, how do we get better at it? You practice it. There are a couple of great books if you're interested. One is called The Whack on the Side of the Head, and the other one is called Thinker Toys. Both of them have dozens of great ways to help us think differently. They're associational thinking provokers, okay? Now, that's forcing it. The other way we can get new ideas and think associationally is by systematically feeding our capacity to get the new idea. Here's what I mean by that. Remember the Think Different campaign in the mid-1990s with Apple? About trying to see the world differently, be more innovative. It was deeply inspiring. We're going to come back to that later in the day before lunch. But basically, it was inspiring, but probably a bit incomplete. Because in the research we did, those who thought most differently are the ones who acted differently before they had to think differently. So it kind of reverses. If I'm pushed into a corner and my boss comes to me, or the consumer experience says to me, we've got to get a new solution here, it's demanding that I think differently right now. And all I'm going to propose is that the more we act differently before we have to get that new solution, the better we're going to be at it. And what I mean by that is we ask questions that are provocative and challenge the status quo. We observe the world like an anthropologist. We network for ideas, not for careers and resources. And we experiment, experiment, and experiment. Acting that way will prepare us so that when we're stuck in a situation trying to get a new solution, we'll be far more likely to do it and enjoy the process. Now that's where we're at. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back, and when we return, we're going to go through those 4 behaviors, the acting different stuff, in terms of how I could solve my everyday problems in my work at Nedbank. Okay? So I've got 10:30. Is that what you've got? Let's start promptly, restart at 11, and we're going to launch into those next behaviors. There's that high energy going again. You've got your sugar high and your orange juice high, and here we go. When innovators are trying to get a solution to a problem, they really do act differently, and the beginning point are the questions they ask. And they don't just ask one or two questions, am I right? Think of the innovators whom you know. It could be yourself, could be people you work with. Do they tend to ask more questions or give more answers? You know what I'm talking about? Remember, one of the people we interviewed was A.G. Lafley, the CEO of Procter & Gamble. I interviewed him years ago before he became the CEO of Procter & Gamble. We were doing a research project. I had a list of questions. He was the interviewee. And within 2 minutes of that conversation, what was he doing? He was asking me about every angle of each idea and of the research methodology and the design and the implications. And I know if I went back and looked at that transcript, he would have asked me more questions than I asked him. And that's the essence of it. These folks ask 1,000 questions. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, one of the guys who worked with him said that's exactly what he does. He's got a high question-to-talk ratio, which means he asks more questions and he gives more answers. Now, the other thing they're doing, it's a quantity. Remember like the brick test, the brick you did thing? Quantity matters. Asking more questions helps. It's not a linear relationship. 10,000 questions is not better than 1,000 questions, but asking more than normal. Now, the other piece is it's asking provocative questions. Now, anybody have 17, 15, 16-year-olds in their house right now? Do they ask provocative questions? They do, don't they? Or, remember when we were doing that with our own parents? We'll know a question is provocative I'm forgetting the right word. When it provokes emotion or evokes emotion inside of us. And it often is like it makes us irritated, angry, whatever, but a provocative question is an emotional question. And if we're not moving into that space, we're not changing the status quo. And that's what these folks are doing. They're asking provocative questions. So where do they start? They start with questions that try to figure out what is going on here. In a retail banking situation, they might walk into a bank and they would be asking questions of themselves and other people about what's the territory, what's going on, what's happening and why. That's the first step. Again, back to A.G. Lafley, he did what I'm going to describe before he ever became the CEO in 2001 through 2009 of Procter & Gamble. But when he was the CEO, 186 countries they operated in, he would land in an airport like I did last night. He would then go to a hotel, and after he's at the hotel, he wakes up in the morning. Where's the first place he goes? Where? I think I heard supermarket there. Did I hear supermarket there? Okay. He goes to a supermarket. He actually goes to several supermarkets. Now, for an innovator, here's a really important issue. What questions is A.G. Lafley asking himself about the situation when he's in those supermarkets? Because the question we ask drive the things we see. If the question I'm asking is, what are the price points of the different thing here? What am I paying attention to? Pricing. If I'm asking questions of, where are we positioned? Where's our product compared to some? That's what I'm going to be paying attention to. So the question we ask drives what we see. Now, he was very explicit about his question. Here's what he was asking. Are consumers delighted when they buy our products? Now, they sell Tide here, right? Tide detergent. When was the last time you saw somebody delighted about buying Tide detergent? But that's what he's trying to get at, delight. They're delighted when they buy the stuff. Now, he may be looking at issues of pricing and competitors and placement and all that kind of other marketing, issues that we would look for. But at a very fundamental level, when he walks out of a supermarket, he wants an answer to the question, are they delighted? Then, where does he go next? Where would you go? Where? Stores? Not yet. He's sending a signal as a leader. He's telling people what matters. And the first point of what matters is that what he called that moment of truth when people buy our stuff. What's the second moment of truth? When they use the stuff. Does it work? And then when he goes to homes. So he had 5 or 6 home visits set up, so he doesn't walk into a house with people that aren't quite dressed for the morning, but it's like going to the home, he's watching these cleaning products, cosmetic products, other sorts of home products, and he's trying to figure out, what's the question? Are they delighted when they're using our products? And then once he does those home visits, asking that question, getting data, that's when he goes to the employees and the leaders in that particular country or region, and then they have the conversation. And I don't think it takes much to see. Imagine that CEO like him, having done that homework out there in the field before he ever gets to the office. Imagine that conversation with the local leaders, as opposed to the leader who flies into the country, drops into a limousine, goes to the headquarters, and starts a conversation. You can feel the difference, am I right? That's what fuels the innovation, is he's got the questions to get real insight around what's going on. And it gives them some new products. Now, the next piece is, I get the terrain, I know what's going on. It's a series of questions about what might be, what if, why not, how could. It's about the future, it's about solutions. Now, some of the questions were constraining questions these innovators would ask, like, take Nedbank. What if tomorrow legal laws were put into place that completely made it impossible for Nedbank to currently sell its products and services to its existing customers? In other words, you wake up, you go to work, and you're legally prohibited from selling to your current customers. What would you do? It's that kind of constraint-creating question that leads to some new companies. It actually created a company in North America called Priceline, which was the first auctioning company for unused hotel and airplane seats. But it came from, what if we couldn't sell to traditional customers? How else might we do it? And it led to a whole new business line. The other what if questions are completely trying to move constraints away. Steve Jobs is a master at this. He would basically go to his teams and say, what if money were no point here, no object? What if you had unlimited money? What would you do in your situation? And when they ended up buying Pixar and Steve Jobs went on the board of Walt Disney Company, the first thing he did when he walked into that space was think bigger, think bigger, think bigger, and it's really about relaxing constraints. Sounds simplistic, but has anybody ever tried that? I mean, that's the notion, constraining questions that force us into new places. The other piece is, okay, why not? David Neeleman, this guy on the right here, he founded a number of different airlines, initially in North America, then in South America. He's a Brazilian by birth. He founded a company called Morris Air that was bought by Southwest Airlines. Then he worked for Southwest, got fired. I won't tell you the story there, but it's an interesting story. And then he started an airline called JetBlue in the United States. Anybody flown on JetBlue before? A couple of people. Then in 2008, he left JetBlue, and he went down back to Brazil, and he started Azul Airlines. And it's incredibly successful as a low-cost airline with a high service orientation. Well, one of the first challenges they faced was, why? Here's the why not question for Dave. He's always asking why not. It was first, in Sao Paulo, it was a question of the airport they were flying in and out of was about 60 minutes away from downtown Sao Paulo. They started doing the math, and they figured out the taxi ride from downtown Sao Paulo to the airport will cost more than the airplane ride wherever they're going in Brazil. That's a problem. So his question is, why can't we build an entire feeder bus system to bring people to the airport from Sao Paulo? Now, you see small bus systems, but not a complete, almost community-like bus system. And his executives said what to him? You know, airlines don't do that. You know, we don't do those sorts of things. His response was, why not? And that sort of question then led him to build this huge bus system, and it's incredibly successful at bringing in thousands of people. Guy Laliberté, the founder of Cirque du Soleil, and you're going tonight to a Cirque du Soleil-like show, but not theirs particularly, but I understand it's great. Guy Laliberté, when they're coming to him for new shows at Cirque du Soleil, basically, if he gives them an idea and they say we can't do it, what does Guy say to them? Why not? And it's more than that, it's, I want you to prove to me we can't do it. And if you can give me lots of good data, fine. Otherwise, you're going to get why not, why not, why not. And that's how they do it. They're just constantly asking these questions because here's the fundamental point. The important and difficult job is never to find the right answers. It's to find the right questions. Innovative leaders are searching for the right question for this reason. Questions are connected to answers. Remember that problem, again, you're thinking about, probably at work, might be at home, that I asked you about earlier today? The reason that problem exists is because the question we're asking is the wrong question. The question's creating the problem, and that's what we're asking, and that's what we're living. So, if we want to get a new answer, in other words, a new solution to the problem, what do we have to do? We've got to get a new question. But this is not easy. And that's why we're stuck. So you ever been in those meetings when you're stuck? You got a problem, it's strategic, it's important, you care about it, you've debated it, you've gone back and forth, you've gone this way, you've gone that way, and you still can't figure out a solution. You've been in those meetings before? Ever? Yes? When you're in that moment, here's what I suggest you do. Stop. You care about the problem, that's the first step. And then stop, here's what we do. I'm going to go back here. Question storm. Time out, tell the group of 5 or 6 people, we get a flip chart. We don't have enough room in here to really use these flip charts today. Let's pretend, though, we're using them. Get a flip chart, put it up. Here's what we do. Number 1, we ask nothing but questions about the problem. So try to just pull out of your head and your mouth answers and statements and exclamation points. Ask nothing but questions. So imagine a conversation in that space of nothing but questions. Then you've got the flip chart there or the whiteboard. You write down question number 1. What am I doing when they're writing that down? One person writing the question down. I'm thinking of more questions. And looking at their question. And we just keep writing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If it's a problem I care about, get at least 75 questions. It's not going to be easy. You're going to hit a wall at 35, trust me. Push through it, break through it, keep going, at least 75. Then once 75 are generated, step back and look at the questions and say to yourself, which of these questions, if we got good answers to them, would most likely help us get a better solution to the problem? And then we go off and we do our homework, trying to solve it. But it's really getting a better question that we're talking about. We're going to do this now, and we've slightly changed some of these problems. Most of them are the same, but these are some example problems. We're going to do question storming in an abbreviated form just to get a feel for it. We don't have time to do a full-out 75 question storm. Here's what I want you to do. Pair up with 2 or 3 people, pairs or trios, around the table. Get where you can see one person writing down all the questions. So move your chairs around enough that you can all see the single sheet of paper you're writing the questions down on. Pick a problem, and then I want you to question storm. Ask nothing but questions, write them down as fast as you can, number your questions. I want you to go to 25 questions. Again, it's an exercise. We're not doing it full out, we don't have time. 25 questions. The first pair or trio of people to hit 25, please put your hand up and say, 25, so I know it's done. At that point, we're going to shut it down and move on. So Find a pair or trio. Pick a problem. Don't labor over the problem. And then it's nothing but questions about why is it a problem or what the solution might be. Go. Okay. We're going to call it quits now. You got a taste of the experience, okay? Now, I know it was short. I know it was extremely abbreviated, but just by doing what you did, again, did anybody see the problem from a slightly different angle, get a little bit different perspective on it by anybody? I see a number of heads. It's that simple, I guess is what I'm trying to suggest. And basically, here's what I would propose, and it sounds too simple, but try it. I've seen it work for a lot of executives around the world. Take 4 minutes today. You've got a problem you care about, right? It may be this one, it may be one that you're trying to solve in your work, in your world. Take 4 minutes, write down nothing but questions about the problem. What do you do tomorrow? Same thing. 4 minutes. You do that for 7 days, you got 28 minutes. You do it for 2 weeks, you've got 56 minutes, right? Give yourself 1 hour in 2 weeks to ask nothing but questions about the problem that's been vexing and troubling you for who knows how long. And email me if at the end of 2 weeks you don't get a new perspective. Maybe not a solution, but a new perspective that will lead you at some point to it. Now, if you happen to do this on problem after problem over the course of a year, you've just gifted yourself 24 hours out of a whole year of asking nothing but questions about problems you care about. And all I can suggest is, if you do it, you will solve those problems more efficiently. And there's going to be a side benefit, and we've watched this happen with people who do it. The side benefit is also, I'm sitting in a room, I'm having a conversation with my peers or my bosses, and what kinds of questions do I ask if I do this for a few months? And I'm sitting in that meeting, doesn't matter what the issue is, I'm asking better questions. People will see it. It will be noticeable. Try it. Anyway, let me know what your experience with it is. Give it a try. Here we go. The next part, so the first part, thinking associationally, questioning every innovator, and every innovator we talk to, famous or not so famous, they did both of those consistently, regularly, and in enough quantity that they were getting new ideas. The next piece of acting differently, they were different people. Some watched the world. They're the observers. Some talked. They loved to talk to people to get new ideas, and others were the doers, the experimenters. They would try different things to get new ideas. So observers watch, networkers talk to different people to get new ideas, experimenters try stuff. Who are you? If you had to pick one of those as your strength, in other words, I tend to talk more than I watch. I tend to do or try more than I talk or watch. If one of those is a dominant strength for you, which one is it? I'm going to real quickly ask you to stand up when I say one of these. So who in the room would say, out of those three, observing, that's my strength? Stand up, please. Okay? Down. Now, networkers. I love to talk to people to get new ideas. Okay? Different. Can you see it's a different set of people? Down, please. Experimenters? Up, please. There we go. You like to try stuff and just see if it works, right? Great. Here's the point for Nedbank or a team, could be small or large group of people. We all have our strengths here. Some are observers, some are networkers, some are experimenters. Go with your strengths and know your team's strengths to leverage them well. So here we go. What do I mean by observing in a little more detail? It begins with the eye, the ears, the mouth, the nose. It's like being there. It's being fully present. It's paying attention to what's going on. Now, doctors, experts, trained well in their field. I don't know the data for many other parts of the world, but I do know the scary data for medical doctors in the US. How quickly do they come to a diagnosis of a problem when a patient is in their office? Any guesses? 18 seconds. 4 or 5 diagnostic criteria, 80% of the time right, but you know the deal, and it can be profoundly tragic. You know, that other 20% of the time, they miss stuff. And sometimes it's horrible. But the notion is, sometimes the more professional we become, the less we see. Now, these are my eyes. An optometrist took these pictures of my eyes. I have the beginnings of slight cataracts in my eyes. It's the gray spot right around there. It makes it a little difficult to see at night already. Now, think of that image, that metaphor. In our professional world, sometimes the better we get, the less we see. Now, those are my eyes. Here's my, sort of professional challenge. I teach about leadership. I'm doing it in Scandinavia. I've got this picture up on the screen, a group like this out in the audience. I'm talking about how many see the old woman and the young woman in the picture, and you know the routine, right? And about 10 or 15 minutes later, everybody gets it. Well, I'm doing that, and back in the corner, I can tell by 7 or 8 minutes into it in that room, somebody is getting really mad. And it's obvious, what's going on. Finally, he stands up and he says, "Gregersen, I don't get it. I don't see an old woman in that picture. I don't see a young woman in that picture. All I can see is a great big bear eating a woman's head." I never saw it before because I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't paying attention. And lo and behold, there's the great big bear's jaw eating a woman's head. Now, I was telling this I was talking about this story recently, and it was in Nairobi, where my daughter lives, with a group of executives in Nairobi. And when I got to the point of, I don't get it, I don't see a young woman, all I can see is, and somebody in the audience screamed out, "A lion eating a woman's head." And the bear is an image that comes from a kid growing up in Finland. You read these little books about bears in the forest. In Africa, you've got lions. You look at data, you see things differently. And the issue becomes, as leaders, we have to get out of those patterns and see the world for what it is. A really fun story. You've heard of cedar citrus here in Africa, South Africa? It's one of the larger growers here, orange growers. And Andries Fixer works there, and he's an observer. He himself created one of the best strategic advantages cedar citrus has in the industry. Here's the deal. All his job is to watch the groves and make sure they're safe. So he's kind of watching. And you know the problem, which is the baboons are eating the fruit. And he watches where they're eating. And he notices patterns like an anthropologist, and he pays attention to it. And ultimately, it sorts out that they're basically stealing most of the fruit from a single tree. So at that point, he goes over with his observation and looks at the tree, and it's like, this does not make sense. Every piece of fruit in that tree is completely green. It's like it's not ripe. What's going on? Why are they stealing it? He opens up the fruit, and you know when fruit is ripe, that smell that you can just smell it when it opens? It was one of those, whoa, you could smell it, and then he tasted it, it's juicy. It was the ripest, juiciest orange he'd ever had in his life. They knew it. He didn't. So then he goes back to a moment of truth. He goes back and he tells his boss, "Here's what I discovered." Instead of just dismissing it, the boss paid attention, took it to different people. They did some more exploration. What did they discover? That the baboons had discovered a variety of tree that was early ripening, but it didn't show on the outside. It shaved off a month in the growing season, and then they cloned those trees, and it allows them 2 growing seasons, not 1, because of that observation. And because somebody listened to the idea, and then they collaborated to do something about it and make it happen. All that from somebody paying attention, being an observer. Now, this is going to take 4 or 5 minutes, but it's a great example from a guy named Doug Dietzen. He's a designer for GE Medical Systems. And think about it. In some ways, a hospital is like a bank. You've got people coming in. They've got issues, technical issues, emotional issues, social issues that they're trying to solve in the bank. Am I right? It's more than just the transaction. And they had been making these medical imaging equipments like CAT scanning machines that, they were beautiful machines, but they weren't paying attention to the emotional experience. And let me just show you their way of making these machines more attractive to little kids having their heads scanned. Okay? Here we go.
Hi, I'm Doug Dietz. I'm the principal designer for global design at GE Healthcare, and I'm the lead designer for Adventure Series. The Adventure Series is really an activity that we've been working on to see what can we do around our diagnostic imaging equipment to make it friendlier for both the family and for young patients. We have large diagnostic imaging equipment at GE Healthcare. They're huge, and some of them make noises. Adventure Series is really looking at it really from the child's perspective, looking at where their anxiety points are and coming up with some really nice solutions that help those, whether those are visually taking over the room in a theme, like a jungle theme or a pirate adventure or something, as well as music that leads them into the room and coloring books. So we wanted to have elements that addressed all the anxiety points.
My name's Liz Auer.
I'm Duncan Auer.
Where is this? Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. Well, we're here today for a CT scan of Duncan's sinuses. He's had some really chronic congestion and coughing. So we're going to have a look and see what's going on in there. And the pirate room was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. The room was painted completely like a pirate setup, including the floor. The floor was like the dock with the water on the sides, and animals and things on the walls. And the CT scanner itself was like the wheel of a pirate ship. It's for a child, it can be kind of scary. You see things that make noise and they look very institutional, and this is, you're not even really thinking about the fact that you're doing a procedure. Very, very welcoming, very whimsical and fun.
Distraction starts out with a few items to try to catch the child's attention. But you need more than that. You have to have the buy-in from the staff, the physicians, from the nurses, the technologists, and even the families, so that when they come here and they see what we've done and how we've decorated the rooms, they feel as if they really are on an adventure. And they feel when they're having their scan, there's no need to be panicked or afraid. So that when they get up out of the scan and they leave, they're walking out that door with a positive feeling.
We really started rough with our ideas, and behind me you'll see some of the sketches that we came up with, just pencil and pen, getting our ideas down. And we thought from the beginning what a powerful thing it would be to have a cross-functional team that allowed us to look at this from many different filters. We brought in child life specialists. We worked with Fern Schupek, director of the Children's Museum here in Milwaukee.
We're thrilled that GE approached us. We serve, 200,000 children and adults every year. I think they felt that they really could, be driven, their project could be driven in part by the expertise that we could offer in terms of how to meet the needs of children and families. As an adult who's gone through scary medical testing, I know it's just tremendous anxiety. The difference with children is that, our ability as adults to explain to them what they can expect. Children are creatures of habit. They really rely on their senses to understand their world. As an adult, I walk into a hospital and I say, oh, I hate that hospital smell. For a child, it's why doesn't it smell like my pajamas? Why doesn't it smell like my mom? Why doesn't it smell like our kitchen? This is the essence of the childhood experience. We need to be more focused on the needs of children and families, whether it is in the context of medical procedure or early childhood development as a foundation for doing better in school. So, and this is another area where I think the GE team was incredibly receptive to the message that we're carrying, which is as a community, and I mean that in sort of a global sense, as a community, we always need to be pushing the envelope in terms of what we can do to meet the needs of children and families and make their experience richer, more rewarding if we want better outcomes.
Why I really wrapped myself around this and tried my best to pull in some of the best people that I could to work with me is that I always kept in my mind that frightened child that was going through cancer or that was really having some problems going through their scan. And that is such a tough thing for a little one. It's such a tough thing for a family. And I did put my heart and soul behind it. And it means a lot to me now that we have a solution, and that the solution is helping the way it is, and it's helping these families. And what a great thing to work for a huge company like GE, but show some passion like this, that we can do something for people.
To me, it's a powerful story that started with an observation. They had designed these pieces of machinery. Doug was one day walking through a hospital, and he looked into one of the rooms, and he noticed this kid with cancer just bawling, crying, because he had to go into that machine, and he was afraid of it. And Doug thought to himself, how did we create this piece of equipment that scares kids that way? And he never thought of that question. And that was part of the motivation for him. So then they go off, and as you saw in the video, they go to a children's museum to know, how do you deal with children effectively? They actually went to preschools and schools to watch kids at work, and how do teachers deal with this well? And they did those sorts of observations, bringing them back into constructing experience that before they changed the room like this, it was an 80% sedation rate for kids. You give them drugs to calm them down because the machine's so scary. Post this kind of transformation, it's a 20% sedation rate, completely reversed. Because they knew the job that they were doing. And the job was, number one, it was a technical job, getting that CAT scan done. But there was an emotional job, am I right? And the emotional job is, how do we get the kids to feel comfortable in this space? And there's a social job because the kid's not alone. He's with a family, and there's a social component. And again, I would suggest people walking into Nedbank, be it for business or retail, they've got those three same things going on. It's not just a technical transaction. We're right in the middle right now of buying a home. And for my wife who's never done it before, this is a frightening thing. It's more than a technical transaction. And the more bankers can help her reduce that anxiety, the better. And it's a social, anyway, it all fits. Am I right? And that's the issue. So one of the key things, even if you've got a great marketing division, consumer insight division, great leaders leading great innovative companies do this stuff themselves. So, has anybody in here ever walked through a transaction as if you were a customer through the whole system? Got a few hands. My suspicion is you got some good insights from that, am I right? I see heads going. That's all I'm suggesting, is doing that sort of exercise ourselves to get our own insight about how does this system work. Now the final piece becomes, remember the problem again, be it one of those problems we listed or your own you're trying to get a solution to? If you're an observer in the room, take some time to think to yourself, where could I go to make observations to get insights? Inside the company, outside the company, where could I go and watch? And then go and watch. And when you come back, ask yourself, or if your people are out there making the observations, ask them the following question. It's profound. What was surprising or what was unexpected when you went and made the observation? It's that simple. It's a question Scott Cook asks himself and everybody around him all the time. And it doesn't have to be, it could be a designed observation, but it could be somebody went and just saw a customer. Ask them the same question. What was surprising? What was unexpected? And if you're consistently getting answers from your employees, not much, then it's probably time to build their skills of observation and somehow help them do it. It's really important. One key way of doing it. And so it's not what you look at, it's what you see with your head, with your heart, and with your hands, and really trying to figure it out. If we don't do this observation well, sometimes we make dumb mistakes, and this guy kind of got in one of those situations. Innovation skills work not only at work, but they work on the street as well. Anyway, there we go. Networking is not about getting a new job. It's not about careers. It's not about getting resources. It's about getting new ideas. It's a very different way of networking. So, if you're trying to get a solution to a problem that matters to you, write down, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, not 60. Write down on a piece of paper or on your iPad or your smartphone, write down the names of the people whom you would go talk to. And you have confidence that if you talk to them, they could help spark a new idea, give you a little bit different perspective just by having a conversation. You got your list. If you were one of those people who stood up in the group, remember when I asked who's the talker, networker people in the room? Their list is probably longer than people who don't do this that much. And so that's okay. I mean, that's their strength. That's what they do a lot of, but they probably have a kind of longer list. But the other piece is the list is a bit different. And here's how. There's a great video from an Apple campaign that explains how to network for ideas. So look at your list that you have of people you would go talk to. The point becomes the following. It's that there are people on that list who are not like you. They don't think like you. They don't have the background you've got. So men, women, they're different in a lot of different ways. How many have a different gender on their list? Got it. Hands up. Okay. Somebody from a different technical professional background than your own. Somebody from a different organization than Nedbank. Somebody outside of the banking industry. Somebody from a different nationality or country of origin. Somebody from a completely different political persuasion. You're right, they're left, you're conservative, they're liberal, you're this, they're that. How many have their... Do you see how that number's smaller? I was doing this with a different financial services firm in Canada and North America recently, and it was the same sort of thing. And one of the participants in the audience made a very smart conversation. You know what he said? All those people in the other party do business with our bank. And if I don't understand how they think, how can I do good business with them? It's really interesting. For what it's worth. How many have somebody that is 30 years or more older than you on the list? 30 years or more younger than you are. Some CEOs actually go to 7-year-olds to get perspective on strategic plans because 7-year-olds don't have adult lenses. They see the world differently. Really, systematically. So the issue becomes, if I'm trying to get new ideas, set aside a lunch, set aside a dinner, set aside a time to just talk to people who are different. When we're picking friends, who do we pick? People like us. When we're networking for ideas, do the opposite. So, you know, if somebody at Apple, that designer, remember who was trying to solve that problem, had talked to somebody at Bang & Olufsen in Scandinavia, they solved the problem the same way 6 years before Apple did. But nobody had the conversation across the Atlantic Ocean, and they could have solved it even quicker. So, Never Be Out Alone, it's a great book, but my point is, don't eat with people who look like you and think like you. So, you know, set aside time, find time, make time to have those conversations. I mentioned Mark Benioff, founder of Salesforce.com, arguably the founder of cloud computing. Whether you hate it or like it, he started it in terms of a commercial enterprise. He's now in his mid-40s. Most startups are started by people now, you know, technical startups are started by people who are how young? Kind of early 20s often, teens and 20s. Mark Benioff realized, I don't get their world anymore. And so what he does, and one of these conversations led to within enterprise Twitter, Facebook combination called Chatter, a new product for them. But what Benioff does is he regularly asks people who are 20 years younger than him to come to dinner at his house. One of those guys was Drew Houston from Dropbox, and that's where Drew Houston's conversation with Mark Benioff at dinner led to this new product and idea. But he does it systematically. It's how he gets his new ideas. Now, another one that's not quite as high-tech, that's related to the stuff sitting in the middle of your table, Play-Doh. Did you play with Play-Doh when you were a kid? Got quite a few hands, okay? That started in 1956. Noah and Joseph McVicker were brothers. One of them ran a business that made industrial putty for industrial purposes, had nothing to do with play. They were sitting at dinner with his sister-in-law, who was a school teacher. different industry. She's complaining about the dough they're using for sculpture. Made out of flour, salt, water, it falls apart, dries up, all the problems. One of the McVicker brothers said, why don't you try some of our industrial putty at work? I mean, at the schools. See if the kids like it. She took a can of it, the kids loved it, now 50 plus, 60 plus years later, 2 billion cans later, knockoffs later with these generic products like you've got in the middle of the table. It's a reminder that having these conversations, as simple as they may seem, can lead to new ideas. If we put ourselves at the intersection where we're going to bump into somebody. Anybody driven the Arc de Triomphe in Paris? Anybody gotten in an accident at the Arc de Triomphe? It's interesting. 12 major arteries coming into that roundabout, and the police attitude about an accident on the Arc de Triomphe is the following. If you choose to be in the intersection, it's your fault if you get in an accident. Doesn't matter how the accident happened, it's an assumed 50-50 responsibility. Isn't that interesting? So what I'm suggesting is, if you're a networker for ideas, get yourself to an intersection where you're going to bump into somebody who doesn't think like you. And you never quite know what the accident will produce. Okay. Again, if I had a problem, personal, or we're not going to, given the interest of time, we're getting a little bit tight here. Imagine these problems, or imagine the one that's related to your own work. If I'm networking for new ideas, I would think of my problem, sit and figure out, and I would probably talk with 2 or 3 people because it's better to get other perspectives on this. I would make a list of people who are different, who could give me some new insight and some new ideas, and then I'd put in my schedule, my appointment book, my calendar, an appointment to have lunch with them, to have dinner with them, to meet with them. And again, do that 4 or 5 times. It's inevitable a new perspective is going to come on that everyday work problem. Okay. Last skill, experimenting. You have on your table, if you haven't eaten it and died already, it's a product that has nuts in it. So if you are allergic to nuts, please don't eat it. Feel free to open it. You're welcome to have it. This is the essence of experimentation. One way of experimenting is trying new things, trying out new stuff. So, if you like, it's chocolate, dates, and a nut. It's called the Choco Date. Now, that kind of trying something new is what led Howard Schultz at Starbucks to found Starbucks. He was selling coffee grinding machines at a conference in Italy, didn't go to the conference meetings, went to the Italian coffee shops, experienced something like you are if you've never had a Choco Date before, something new. And then here's the next step. Given that experience, he's thinking to himself, what does that have to do with my problem and issues at my work? And then he's thinking and he realizes we could start these kind of coffee shops in North America and the rest of the world. So you may get nothing out of the Choco Date besides a little bit of sugar to keep you going until lunch. But it could be as simple as having a fun conversation with somebody around what does that experience or the Choco Date have to do with my problem that I'm trying to solve? It's got 3 components. Do I have 3 elements to my problem? It's got a sweetness to it. Do we have a sweet experience when people walk into Nedbank? You see those sort of connections? It's just taking 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes to think of experiences and link them back to the problems we're trying to solve. Branson, classic. Richard Branson does this all the time. Do you think he likes what he's drinking? No. That's because it's coconut-based jet fuel that he's drinking. It was a classic Branson, marketing campaign. He's not going to die. It's made out of coconut oil, but it's jet fuel, processed for flying jets in the air. But that's him, and that's what led him to not just that kind of stuff, but he tries all sorts of things. He tries hot air balloons, all that kind of stuff, way up in the sky. That leads him to businesses all over the world and things like Virgin Galactic that go to the edge of the Earth. But again, it's trying new stuff that's Branson's signature. It's his strength to get new ideas. Now, you probably have traveled to many places here. We're going to do a quick around the world in 60 seconds. Experience something new. Here we go. Again, it's travel sometimes can start new ideas. And it's going somewhere. It might be across the city. It might be across the country. It might be across the world. A guy named Nate Alder was a snowboarder, lived in the cold climate, and at one point he went on vacation to Brazil. He'd scuba dived before, but never deep. And when you're going really deep in the water, it's super cold, so you wear a dry suit that keeps you warm because they put gas, radon, I think it's called argon gas, between the dry suit and your skin to keep you warm. So he goes down, he has a great experience diving, stays warm, comes back up, is on the boat coming back to the shore, thinking about his experience, and then he makes the connection back to snowboarding. Cold underwater, cold on mountains. So what does he do? He creates a whole line of clothing made out of argon gas. Super thin, super light. You put the gas in, keeps you warm. It's incredible, climate. But that comes from an experience, a reflection, and then a new idea that he actually turned into reality. Other experimenters take things apart. You know, they rip apart processes, they rip apart products, they try to figure out what's going on inside. I happen to have a father who was a master mechanic and took things apart, and so I now have sitting at home an old iPod, an old clicker like this for a remote, and I have an old printer. I have not thrown them away, and I haven't taken them to recycling. Why? Because I'm looking forward to just taking them apart, to seeing what's inside. How does this thing work? What's in there? And that's how some people get new ideas. And so this one is basically somebody was trying to figure out a better way of building a table saw. And the problem he was trying to solve was table saws cut people's fingers off. And so here's his solution to the problem. They took it apart, they looked at it piece by piece, tried to figure out what was happening. They built an entirely different kind of saw. It's called stop saw. Here we go. So it's that notion of you just do a quick, rapid prototype, you try things. You ever heard of Coinstar? Coinstar is one of the world's largest manufacturers of vending machines. And they're constantly trying to figure out new and interesting ways of potentially doing a vending machine. One of the things they were trying to figure out recently was, what if we had a vending machine? This is a what if. What if we had a vending machine that you could put one of your gift cards into and you'd get cash back? It's an idea. So how did they test or pilot and prototype it? It was simple and cheap and quick. They got a cardboard box that somebody could be in, and the person got in the cardboard box. They cut a hole in it, and they had a sign on top that said, insert your gift card here, get cash back. And the person would walk along, they would see it, they'd put the card in, the guy would look at it, run it through a machine, give them cash back. And they talk with people about the experience. Terribly low cost, quick sort of prototype to get feedback. Does the idea have any credibility? Interesting way of doing it. You know, that's in the banking world. In the fashion world, there were two sisters called Jen and no, sisters. They were two classmates. They had just gotten their MBA degrees. They were sitting in New York City. One of their sisters was complaining, even though she had a good job, of not being able to buy a high-end, really nice designer dress for this great party she was going to. And Jen, one of the Jens here, basically heard that, and she thought, if my sister, who's making pretty good money, can't afford one of those dresses, there's got to be a lot of people in that situation. I wonder if we could rent dresses, high-end dresses, like Netflix, where you just, rent a video. So they did a rapid experiment, rapid prototype, fairly low cost. Fairly low cost. They bought a few designer dresses. They took them to Harvard Square, where the young co-eds are, the young people in college. They basically said, will you rent these dresses? The people could touch them, they could try them on, and they rented them. First hypothesis was, will people rent dresses? And the answer was yes. What's the second thing they needed to figure out? Will they bring them back? And will they bring them back in good condition? And they found out they did. So then they moved to experiment number 2. A different college campus. They brought the same dresses, but they said you can look at them, you can touch them, but you can't try them on. Lower rental rate, but still a decent rental rate. People rented them, hypothesis confirmed, and then they returned them in good condition. So that part's confirmed again. Experiment 3, before they actually decided to maybe try the business, was show people, young women, pictures of the dresses. Will you rent this? Ah, okay. They had a 5% rental rate of just pictures, which in the internet business is more than enough to make money. They rented them by pictures alone, got the dresses back, and then from those 3 experiments realized we've got something here. Since then, they've got about $45 million of venture capital put into the company. It's one of the biggest rental firms in the world, or at least in North America, around high-end clothing. But a series of prototypes to get the new idea. That's how folks do it. I don't care what